Welcome, my friends, to our journey in risk management for today. This month, I will be celebrating 20 years as a PMP and 15 years as a PMI-RMP. So it gives me great pleasure to be sharing insights with you, ponderings and musings that along the way I have made in my journey. Risk management is many things to different people, so it's very important that before we begin diving deeper into risk, we should define it, right? So I like thinking of risk as uncertainty that can impact you, can impact your life, that can impact your project positively or negatively. Irony is a lot of people don't see risk as being positive. Whenever I introduce people to that concept in my classes, they are quite surprised that a risk could be positive. But I want you to begin thinking of risks that are negative, which we call threats, and risks that are positive, which we call opportunities. So it's important that as business people, we manage both the negative and the positive, not just the negative. A lot of firms, they love to manage the negative. They spend 99.9% of their time. The best of them, maybe 90. Very few firms have I ever gotten an invitation to speak to them about positive risks. In fact, out of the scores of organizations, there's one that was into special plastics, specialty plastics firm that will remain nameless, because maybe that's the upper hand they have. They think about opportunities proactively and they go after the opportunities. So today, I'm going to take you through a pretty extensive journey in risk management. As you can see here, I decided to focus on not just the negative, but the positive. I have escalate the risk, which could also be used for negative, but I also have share, I have accept, I have exploit, I have enhance. So I'm very attuned to both the positive and the negative risks. As a professional, I have found both to be important. You got to balance up that equation. In our journey today, not only will we talk about risk management through the lens of vanilla flavored risk management, we'll be going a step further to talk about the PMI-RMP certification, which I am very proud to have gotten back in 2010. Seems so long ago, my goodness. And in addition to that, I'm going to share with you some of my insights about AI powered risk management. In today's AI race, it would be foolish not to use AI for your analysis of data that is risk oriented. So, without much ado, let's begin a very interesting journey into the world of risk. We're first of all going to talk about the basics before we get into the AI powered stuff. So, let's jump straight in. When you talk about project risk management, that is very specific to projects. But I want you to know that outside of the realm of project risk management is a much broader context of risk in general. As you're driving to work, you're taking risks. As you're going down that alleyway, you're taking risks. As you're walking around, be it in the noon or at night, there are different levels of risk. The level of uncertainty, as my dad used to say, walking around late at night, he used to hate my late nights. But when I was younger, I would do the late nights and he would hate it. And being a parent myself now, I can understand why my dad didn't like those late nights because the level of risk is exponentially higher. Because it's dark, the level of uncertainty, it just magnifies. But at least if it's daytime, you can see what's coming. At night, you can't see what's coming. I remember walking home very late night one night and some shadowy figure appeared just round the corner. And I think he was as alarmed as I was to see me. And he took off running. Thank goodness. Thank goodness it wasn't the other way around. Anyway, just a fun story. Let's jump in. What is risk management? Risk management includes the processes for conducting risk planning, risk identification, risk analysis, response planning, response implementation, and monitoring risks on a project. It sounds like a lot. Now let's laser focus on this well-known chart from the PMI. When you go all the way down to risk management, you see there are 7 discrete things the PMI has mentioned that you should do in order to manage risk. And those 7 things are: one, you got to have a plan; two, you got to identify what you're up against, and not just the risk, but you got to identify the cause and effect; three, you got to do an analysis of a qualitative nature of the score; four, if your organization is so inclined, you could do a quantitative risk analysis, getting more into the monies, getting more into the resource hours and things of that nature. Then, based on that, you can do your risk response planning for both positive and negative. Then you implement the risk responses, and then you monitor the responses. So that's the journey for today. Now let's look under the hood a little bit more. In planning resource management, your main entries are going to be a project charter. That's one of the first things you get. And then you're going to use all of these tools and techniques, expert judgment, data representation, and so on. But what you're really going to look for is, oh, I beg your pardon, I'm sharing the wrong one. So this is meant to be risk management. So let me fast forward to a better place, maybe here. Let me do this in increments since I was in the wrong place. So when you're in planning risk management, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to come out with a plan for how to manage risks. And you're going to have similar tools and techniques to what I showed you, right? You're going to have expert judgment. You might do some data analysis. You might do some meetings. But your chief aim is to come out with a risk management plan, which is our output here. So when you're coming in with your project charter, maybe you have some elements of a project management plan. Your main goal is not to come out with the risks immediately, but it's to come out with a plan that contains things like this: the strategy, the method, the funding, the timing, the categories of risk, the tracking of the risks. Contrary to what a lot of people think, early on in risk management, this is where you actually decide, how is our risk register going to look? How is our risk matrix going to look? So you come out with these ideas very early on, and you create a risk management plan. The risk management plan is a document that explains how risk will be managed throughout the project. It may also contain information about methodology, roles, budgeting, and protocols. So that's step one. So there's a lot to be addressed here. So let's go back to our list. You got plan risk management, and after this, you have identifying of the risks. So in identifying risks, you're going to be involved in identifying individual project risk and overall project risk, and documenting their characteristics in what we call a risk register. The risk register varies, from company to company, but the elements of the risk register are pretty identical. You've got the risks identified, you have the cause, the risk, and the effect. That will be a good risk register. Unfortunately, a lot of firms, they just say, oh, what's the risk? If only they dug deeper, they would find out more about the risk if they required a cause and an effect as well. So it's not enough for you just to have the risk described. You want the cause and the effect, and that helps you more in your analysis. And then you've got the qualitative and quantitative analysis, which eventually gets added to the risk register. But in the very beginning, it's just the cause, risk, and effect, and you progressively add more. Let's take a look under the hood as far as what we do in identify risk. So in identify risk, we bring in elements that exist, such as our project management plan components, one of which will be your risk management plan. You could have agreements, contracts, which could have risks, other documentation. You apply the tools and techniques. Expert judgment is always very helpful. Interpersonal and team skills, because you're going to have a lot of back and forth between the team, understanding their perspective of risk. It needs to be a safe space in the meetings. And eventually, you're going to come out with what we call the risk register, which I showed you. Another output that could begin here is a risk report. And I often refer to the risk report as a State of the Union address as far as risk is concerned. You're going to keep updating the risk report all the way through the project. So now we've talked about 2. Let's go back to our list here. So taking a look, we've talked about plan risk management and identify risk. The third thing you're going to do, this is where it begins to get a little bit murky for people. And that's because we begin going into the analysis. The analysis is hard because sometimes people mix up qualitative and quantitative. But what is the difference? Qualitative risk analysis is the process of prioritizing individual project risks for further analysis or action by assessing, watch this, their probability of occurrence and impact, as well as other characteristics. So, what we're going to do here is find a risk score. And the risk score, you could find that by multiplying the probability rating by the impact rating. So, assuming on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being absolutely certain, 1 being not very likely, and then the impact 5, loss of life, catastrophic, 1, not so bad, an impact. If you have a probability of, let's say, a 3 and an impact of, say, a 4, we have the probability rating and the impact rating. You multiply them and you're going to get what we call a risk score. That risk score is going to be a 12. It is a relative ranking of risks that you've identified. And this is what we do in the world of risk management without getting too far into technicalities and tools. It's a very straightforward on a scale of 1 to 5, you being the expert, because we leverage a lot of expert judgment based on your 20, 25, 30, 40 years, some of you of experience. How probable would you say this risk is? What will the impact be on a scale of 1 to 5? And you have to get pretty prescriptive about those ratings. Those are not just random numbers that you throw out. If you say it's a 1, your firm must have a very tight nomenclature of what a 1 means. Okay, so my recommendation for you, if you're a project manager in a firm and you're spearheading this whole risk effort, you need to make sure that when you are coming up with those numbers, you are very, very prescriptive about what a 1 means in terms of cost, in terms of schedule, in terms of scope, in terms of safety, all around. And this is a hard part of risk that very few people do, because you have a lot of numbers appearing in documents, such as the one I showed you. But when you say a 4, okay, give me some more specificity around the 4 so that I, as a professional, I'm able to go back into my expert judgment banks and come up with something specific, precise. Because qualitative, oftentimes it can be loosey-goosey. In fact, some firms use what I call the lazy method. The lazy method is where you just say, oh, let me qualitatively analyze. I'll just say it's a high. It's like this one here, right? That's a lazy method. Or you say, oh, okay, it's a medium. But what do you mean by a medium? Which is why I prefer going numeric, going a little bit numeric, and you don't have to go into dollars at this point, or euros or yen. You keep it at that probability rating and impact rating. Now, when you multiply them, they're all going to find their level. You're going to have some that are low, those are green. You're going to have those that are yellow, somewhere in the middle. You're going to have those that are abominably high that you have to do something with. But definitely don't do the lazy method. I see some firms doing the lazy method. And while I agree that some risk management is better than none, but this is almost like none because it's so subjective. You got to give me some background how you got to high. And that's where we get into the probability rating and the impact rating. And then the score ultimately. And, don't bounce this just off one individual. Have multiple data points. They're very smart ways of developing these tools. In today's age of artificial intelligence, you could very rapidly in an IT business unit create tools to help your people. Don't just get one data point, get multiple data points from bright people, average them out, do at least 3 if possible, and it won't be so subjective to one person saying it's a 5 or 4. No, let's have multiple points. Because what I've noticed when you get the smart people in the room, even those with 30, 20, 40 years of experience, they all have different perspectives to why we're saying it's high. Are we talking about high impact from a cost perspective or schedule perspective? You see, so that's why you have to intelligently score these risks. It's not enough to just say, well, I think it's going to be a very high cost. Okay, but what about the schedule? What about the scope? You have to factor all that in. And those discussions need to be had. I often say that the risk register is a conversation piece. It's not a solution in and of itself. You can have the best risk register, but if there are no discussions, right, individuals and interactions happening around it, you're just wasting your time. Have the bright people go toe to toe talking about these risks, going against each other in a good way, right? Constructive criticism of each other's ideas, and you're going to come out with a really nice risk register that the project manager can run with. All right. So when we talk about qualitative, don't just say on a scale of 1 to 5, what is it? Let them know what you mean by a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, 5. The output is going to be an update, right? You're going to get an update to the risk register. And that just means you've gone through the risks, you've done a really thorough qualitative risk analysis, you've been intentional, and whether you're doing this for positive risks or negative risks, you got a very robust idea of how to tackle things. Now, many organizations don't do the next step, which is quantitative, and I don't blame them. People get nervous around money. But what exactly is quantitative risk analysis? It's the process of numerically analyzing the combined effect of identified individual project risks and other sources of uncertainty. Okay. Other sources of uncertainty on overall project objectives. Some organizations, they find themselves running away from this, and I honestly don't blame them, because when you introduce money without being thorough, you just make people nervous for nothing. So if you're not doing it the right way, using Monte Carlo analysis and using tools that are tested and tried, my advice is be careful what you do at home, because you might end up getting people really nervous. So the key benefit when this is done the right way is that it quantifies overall project risk exposure. It can also provide additional quantitative risk information to support risk response planning. And it's not required. In fact, the PMI says it's optional, right? You don't have to do quantitative, because it could muddy the waters and it could waste your time. Imagine doing quantitative risk analysis for a $100,000 project. I think that's not really a good use of time. If you're talking about several millions, I would definitely recommend it. But if you're just dealing with a few hundreds of thousands, I would say you could actually manage that very nicely using qualitative. But you have to be very robust in bringing people around the table. It can't just be one person in isolation to get the best results. So the availability of high quality data about the individual project risk and other sources of uncertainty are important, and sound underlying baselines for scope, schedule, and costs. Now, some people say, Phil, how many times have you seen this in firms you've worked in? And the honest truth is, I've only seen one firm that I worked for do a quantitative risk analysis using a Monte Carlo, which is simulating the project several thousands, millions of times. And that was for a weapon systems project. For other projects, I see people getting by with very vanilla flavored qualitative, but very good discussions among the senior executives in the firm. And you got to understand, risk management is not just by having a risk register, it's also in the actions that you build in. So you got to build in intelligent actions as a team, meeting on the regular to discuss emerging trends, things that are happening. Current state of tariffs is really hitting a lot of projects, the political landscape in the Middle East and things like that. It's not enough to just have a risk register that's static. It needs to evolve on the regular. So when we talk about quantitative risk analysis, there's certain tools that we expect you to use. The representations of uncertainty, so that you can effectively plot whatever you're doing in those graphs when you're using the Monte Carlo. You got to understand the distribution types that are relevant to the project. Is it beta? Is it triangular? Is it uniform? All of these are things that should be mentioned if you're doing it the right way. Now, speaking of doing it the right way, the major output you're going to get is, again, an update to your risk register. But this time, as you see in my example here, which is, by the way, very primitive. It's a primitive example, but it's enough to give you an idea of what is done. So for each risk, you want to simulate the outcome. If you're using a Monte Carlo, it will do all this for you. But you also need to put in good data. So on a scale of 0 to 100, using a probability rating, like when you're playing a game and you throw dice, and then you ask, what is the probability of a 1? If it's just one dice that you threw, then it's going to be a 1 out of 6. What is the probability of a one? 1 out of 6, a two, 1 out of 6. But if you have more, so that's the mindset you're bringing in here. And as a professional, when you look for probability, it's a best guess, it's expert judgment, right? And then the impact, it's also for the most part going to be expert judgment as well, except you have data. And honestly, very few projects have the data to make it less than an expert judgment guess, which is why a lot of firms would opt not to do this because it's so subjective. But if it's done properly with the right data, you multiply the probability in percent times the impact in dollars, if we're using dollars, euros, yen, whatever. Some firms decide to use resource hours. I worked with a shipping company, a shipbuilding company, and they did this very well, but they didn't do it with dollars. They did it with resource hours. So they looked for the probability of the risk occurring, they looked for the impact it would have on their manpower, and they came up with an EMV, expected monetary value. In that case, more like a risk magnitude since it wasn't monetary. But they came up with a number that told them what the risk exposure of that item was. And for the items that had high risk exposure, they decided to be very intentional about managing those risks by either mitigating or even avoiding. So before getting into planning of risk responses, you want to know those risks that are extremely high because those are the ones that you're going to go after. When I say high, I'm talking about the expected monetary value, the EMV. Now, not throwing shade on any company that does this. I know some firms do it without really knowing the full impact of what they're doing. But I worked with a logistics firm that did this, and they were quite happy at the results because they had experts that were very knowledgeable and intentional, very collaborative. So when they say the probability of that happening, that's a 90. They're not just throwing numbers out. They're really serious in the analysis, and it's based on historical information and expert judgment. So they did this, and they actually managed their risk register very nicely. So I don't begrudge any firm that uses this, right? I'm not saying don't use it. I'm just saying when you use it, make sure that the people in the room are truly experts who have the historical information to back up whatever they're putting into a quantitative risk analysis. Um, there are other tools that you could use to do this more intentionally. So there's a company that I used to follow very closely back in the day. They're called Palisade, PALISADE.com. Palisade was bought by another company recently. They now go under the name Lumivero. So let me show you their website just in case you are interested in checking them out. So if you go to Lumivero's site, you've got various possibilities. They got different simulations, but they were really known under the Palisade umbrella as a risk analysis company, and they had Monte Carlos, both that could work in Microsoft Project or Excel. Very helpful tools. So you can see they have one called At Risk. They had At Risk for Project once upon a time. Let's see if they still got it. Or At Risk for Excel. Powerful risk analysis for confident decision making. I mean, this requires a lot of deep understanding of project and risk management. So it's really a Monte Carlo simulation. It says at risks, Monte Carlo analysis computes and tracks many different possible future scenarios in your risk model, showing you the probability of each occurring. In this way, at risk shows you virtually all possible outcomes. So if you're a risk geek and you want to knock yourself out with this stuff, as I did, especially as I began growing in the world of risk management, you might want to go check that out. Very good company. They actually have webinars for those of you who are looking for PDUs. You could very well get some PDUs by watching their webinars. They had some free webinars on there once upon a time. So you might want to go in there, take a look at what they've got. All right. For those of you just come in, we are talking about risk management, and I am celebrating 15 years of being an RMP and 20 years of being a PMP. So I'm bringing some of these masterclasses to you to sensitize you to things that have helped me along the way in my career. So, just to give you an idea of the roadmap, those of you who know this familiar face, we've covered plan risk management all the way down to quantitative. We're going to talk about the rest, and then we're also going to go into the risk management professional certification. We're going to go over the outline. I'm going to break it down for you. And then we're also going into the world of AI powered risk before that. Okay. So we've talked about quantitative risk analysis at a sufficient level to give you an idea of what is going on there. Those are the tools, techniques, inputs, and outputs. This is from PMBOK 6, by the way. And going into the next thing is planning risk responses. So, how do you plan risk responses? Well, you got to first have the data, the cause, the risk, and the effect, because this is the process of developing options, selecting strategies, and agreeing on actions to address overall project risk exposure. And the key benefit is that you're going to identify ways to address not only the individual project risk, but the overall project risk, the things that could tank the entire project. You see, the mistake a lot of project managers make, they're only focusing on the individual project risks, but we need you to also focus on the overall project risk. And as a result of you doing this, you're going to allocate resources, you're going to effectively and appropriately respond to the risks. You're going to come up with ideas working with a team. This isn't the PM working in the basement. It's not a solo effort. This is everyone involved. So you're going to have the inputs, project documents, project management plan. You're going to have tools and techniques such as strategies for threats, strategies for opportunities, which I'm going to show you here. I'll give you some helpful mnemonics. You're going to think about contingent response strategies, which is plan Bs. And then strategies for overall project risks are very similar to the individual risks. So, plan risk responses. Let's jump into the tools and techniques one more time. Okay. So, you've got all of these, and it could result in change requests or updates to the risk register. But when you think about this, there are certain mnemonics that I am going to share with you to help you tackle risk from a more intentional perspective. Let's go to a whiteboard here where I can type and write on the board. Okay, here we go. So, we're talking about planning risk responses. And when you're planning risk responses, you got to plan for the negative and you got to plan for the positive. So, we have, let's break it into two. We have negative and we have positive. Okay. For the negative risk, the mnemonic that I use for this is A team. A team. And what does A team stand for? It just stands for avoid, transfer, escalate, accept, and mitigate. Those are your strategies for negative risks or threats. So let's break them down one by one. Excuse my abominable handwriting there. I don't have my stylus. That is all just using my index finger. Okay. So when you talk about avoid means you are 100% taking action that will prevent that risk from having an effect on your project or materializing. It's bringing the probability or the impact to a zero. So think about it, probability times impact, right? That's how we analyze the risk. If the probability is zero, you don't care about the impact. If the impact is zero, you don't care about the probability, right? As long as you can truly get it to zero, right? As long as you can truly nullify the risk. A good example of avoid would be cutting off part of the project and not doing it because it's too risky. There goes the risk, never to happen again. See? Now, going over to the next one, transfer is when you purchase performance bonds. Like when you're taking on work, why do you want the person to be bonded and licensed? Because if anything goes wrong, you don't want it to be a total loss. So, transferring a risk is purchasing insurance, performance bonds, and things like that. Escalating a risk is escalating it to a higher power. So, if there's a risk that something could happen, as opposed to you handling it yourself, you escalate it to a higher power because it's beyond your authority or it's outside of your project's jurisdiction. Accepting a risk has two phases to it, it has two prongs. You can either do a passive accept or an active accept. Passive accept is doing absolutely nothing and saying, well, I guess if it happens, it happens. There's nothing I'm going to do about it. You would accept risks that have very low consequences, low probabilities, low impacts. And we normally throw these into what we call a watch list. You put those risks into a watch list, you watch them, and if they get worse, then you can no longer just accept them. You got to do something about them. And then we also have an active accept. Active accept means you're putting aside some form of contingency to deal with the risk if it happens. So you're saying, let's put aside $500 to deal with this. If it happens, at least we got some money. Or let's put aside additional resources if it happens. You see, it's not proactive. You're still accepting. You're not doing anything proactive. So there's a difference between passive accept and active accept. Active accept is putting money aside, but you're not taking action in advance of the risk occurring. The risk has got to occur, and then the contingency is going to be used. Okay? Now, mitigate as a strategy is a reduction in the probability and or the impact. So when you mitigate a risk, it's not removing it. You see, a lot of people, they use the word mitigate for everything. And mitigate is just one of the five. See? ATEAM. Five things. Mitigate is just one. And it's important as a professional, you be specific. Don't just call everything mitigate. Mitigate is a reduction of probability or impact. How is that different from avoid? Well, avoid is killing that thing that it ain't going to happen. And if it did happen, it's a toothless bulldog. It's like rendering its power useless. So even if the risk happened, the impact is a zero. So that's avoid. Mitigate is different. Mitigate doesn't take it to a zero. Mitigate could still have what we call residual risk. And residual risk has to be addressed in many instances. That residual risk could even become worse than the original risk. So, as a risk professional, when you call something mitigate, understand the ramifications of it. Moving over to the positive side of risk, if I was going to use this as a mirror image, right, using what is on the left as a mirror image, we would say that the opposite of avoid is exploit. Why is that? Because exploiting a risk is one of the most savage responses that you could ever conjure. It's going after that risk vehemently. And I'm talking about positive risk, but you're going after that risk with an intention to obliterate any possibility of that risk not happening. In other words, you are 100% certain that that positive upside risk will happen. And I love the exploit strategy because I've used it a few times. And when you see an opportunity that is so ripe and rife and promising, why wouldn't you exploit it? You should. Transfer, the opposite of transfer is share. And sharing a risk means you're sharing the risk with a third party. That third party is involved in the management of the risk. You're pretty much setting up maybe a special purpose company, or you're doing some sort of partnership, and you're going to share from the risk. Maybe it's a 70-30, a 60-40, even a 90-10. Doesn't make any difference. It's still share. Then we have escalate. The opposite of escalate here is the same. It's escalate as well. Escalating a risk just means, whoa, this is a huge opportunity. There's no way we can pull this off at the project level. This has to be a company thing. It's like when you are working on, let's say, some R&D project, and you're partnering with a company, and they reveal to you, well, this is just one piece. We have 10 other products. Huh. You got to get management involvement, right? That's escalate. Accept, the mirror image of accept on the positive side is also accept. And you also have passive or active. Like, a passive response would be, well, if they give us that additional work, that's fine. We're not going to run after it. That's very passive. Active accept is saying, well, let's have some resources aside. So if that work comes to us, at least we got people we can throw on it. But it's still not like going after it. It's not like exploiting. It's just saying, well, if it happens, it happens. Let's put some money aside. Let's put some resources aside. Last but not least, the opposite of mitigate is enhance. Enhance just means you are increasing the probability or the impact of the positive risk, but you're not taking it to 100 like exploit. Exploit is the most aggressive of all. And, from a business perspective, maybe you can see why it would make sense to think about opportunities more. If you think about opportunities more, your firm is likely not only to win more business, but also to dominate certain market spaces when you're very aggressive with the positive risks. Okay? So, over the past number of minutes, we've been talking about this familiar table. We've talked about plan, identify, qualitative, quantitative, plan risk responses. And now let's talk about implementing the risk responses. Implementing the risk responses means you are keeping your eye on what you said you will do and you are doing it. You don't just come out with proposed responses without doing them. You are actually going to do them. Okay? So, my friends, when you think about these things, you want to think about the pragmatism, right, of implementing the risk response. So let's take a look here. Implementing risk responses has certain tools and techniques as usual. The PMI says implement risk responses is the process of implementing agreed upon risk response plans. The key benefit of this process is that it ensures that agreed upon risk responses are executed as planned in order to address overall project risk exposure, minimize individual project threats, and maximize individual project opportunities. A common problem with project risk management is that project teams spend effort in identifying and analyzing risk and developing risk responses. Then risk responses are agreed upon and documented in the risk register and forgotten. They go into the bottomless pit. But we don't want that. We got to be proactive. So let's take a look at some tools and techniques we use here. The inputs, of course, we have our risk register, our risk management plan coming in. We use interpersonal and team skills. And the way we do this is we inspire, lead, motivate, encourage those who are meant to take action on the risks. We motivate and encourage them to take action. The output, you could have change requests. If things didn't go as planned, you could always change the mousetrap. You might need to update the risk register. But ultimately, this is all about proactivity and it's about great leadership. This is where you have to be a great leader in order to ensure that the promised actions are taken. So let's go a step back. Let's take a look at what we would have populated in our last process. So in our last process, we would have updated the risk response, right? So here you've got have extra peer reviews. That's one. Hire more resources and cross-train, so on and so forth, right? And then ultimately, the strategy could be defined as mitigate or transfer or escalate, like I showed you. We have a risk owner. That is the person whose objectives are impacted by the risk. And oftentimes, the person who came up with the risk response. But we also have the risk action owner or the risk response owner who does the legwork to make it happen. So Bob is a risk owner, Julian is the boots on the ground making that happen. And this one, Mary, is a risk owner, and May is a risk response owner. Now, in some instances, you actually have both people being a singular entity, project manager. In fact, in a lot of firms, people lament to me that, Phil, I am everything on this risk register. I'm the risk owner, I'm the risk action owner, I'm the project manager. And that's okay, But if you have team members that can jump in to help, why do it all alone? See, the problem in a lot of predictive risk management outfits is one person is a centralized leader and trying to do everything as opposed to delegating. So just bear in mind, delegating is the name of the game over here. Okay? So those are our inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs. That is process number 6. Now we're moving into the final one. It's monitor risks. So what is monitor risks all about? Monitor risk is the process of monitoring the implementation of agreed upon risk response plans, tracking identified risks, identifying and analyzing new risks. And the benefit is that it enables project decisions to be based on current information about overall project risk exposure and individual project risk. A good project manager is one who is constantly examining, looking at their risk register and ensuring that things are status quo. And if they're not, making an attempt to change whatever needs to be changed. So moving on here, taking a look at our inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs, we're going to do some data analysis, very important. Analyze data from all angles, do some audits. When we get to the AI component, I'm going to show you a couple of tools to give you ideas of how you can do this. And then the outputs, you're just going to update that risk register. You're going to update the risk management plan as needed. And the key benefit of this is it enables project decisions to be made based on current information about overall project risk exposure. You got to keep your eye on those pesky little risks. Okay. So, my friends, here is a summary, just taking you through, and I mean, this is a very condensed version, but just taking you through how risk management works. You got to plan how to manage the risk. You got to identify the risks. You do a qualitative risk analysis. In some instances, you could do a quantitative risk analysis, and then you can plan your risk responses, implement them, and keep your eye on them. Rinse, repeat. If you need to update any of your plans or registers as a result of this, you would. One of the things people don't remember in risk that is important is risk touches everything. Risk is not just one singular area. In fact, my buddy, the risk doctor, he would often say that the real thing is risk management. Project management is really there to manage the risk, the uncertainty. That's why we have project management, not the other way around. I always found that funny because when you flip it on its head, it looks pretty convincing, right? And it's true that when you think about risk management as being a boss domain, right? You see risk being a container for all the other things you're doing. You're trying to mitigate schedule risk. You're trying to mitigate scope risk. You're trying to mitigate cost risk. You're trying to mitigate procurement risks. Anything unfavorable, you're trying to reduce it. No wonder he looks at risk as being all encompassing. If you have not subscribed to the Risk Doctor video channel on YouTube, I highly advise you check it out. We actually have a course. It's more like a master class, and it's called riskresponder.com. If you are looking to go to that next level, just hearing the awesome Risk Doctor talk about how to effectively manage risk, yeah, this is definitely one that you want to look at. So I know some of you are not looking to get RMP certified, but you are looking to know more about risk. So let me recommend riskresponder.com. It's something that we both put together, Dr. David Hilson and I, to help people better understand risk. Even though a bit of our focus was on the RMP exam, but beyond the RMP exam, this could help any professional who wants to hear thought leadership in risk management. Let me share this with you on the screen. And if you go to riskresponder.com, you'll be able to sign up for this program. It's right there. It's on demand on Vimeo. Yeah. So this is the course. And at the time, we tackled risk management looking at the PMI-RMP content outline. That content outline has since been updated, but the information in this course, it will stand the test of time. It is really, really, really awesome. So I'm playing the part of the student consultant, and Dr. Hilson's playing the part of the professional, giving me the advice, showing me at the time the risk practice guide. We went through that, and very, very, very thorough. That's 4.5 hours of really great risk instruction. Okay, I want to give a shout out to some friends who came through. I see my buddy Raymond came through. Raymond, awesome to see you. Thank you very much. Happy Father's Day to you as well. And Prashant, thank you for coming through. Thank you very much. Appreciate the congrats on my 20th anniversary of being a PMP. Being a PMP for 20 years it's been a fun journey. I can't complain. PMP has opened several doors professionally, and as a result of being a PMP, I've been fortunate to go places I would never even imagined. So if you are thinking of getting RMP certified, PMP certified, yeah, definitely look into that. Definitely do. And if you're looking to bring some of my master classes in schedule or risk or project management or agile or AI in the world of project management to your organization, by all means, definitely be in touch, because I can show you the tricks of the trade. Haven't been an OG in the game, although there are a lot of people that are double my age in the game. Like my buddy Lee Lambert. He's the original OG. I'm still a kid next to him. But anyway, moving into a final thing, we're now moving into the wrap up, at least for this section. We still got a lot more to talk about. It's just a wrap up. So if you are looking to go deeper into risk, or you're looking to take any of PMI's exams, you got to understand the benefit of each process here, understand the 5 strategies for threats, 5 strategies for opportunities, know those key outputs like your risk report, your risk register, your risk management plan, know the different sections in the risk management plan. There's so many things I wish I was able to go into, but I cannot cover all of it. I have probably about 200 slides, which I cannot cover in totality today. There's just no way. But if you're looking to take the RMP exam, just stick around, because towards the end, I am going into how you need to think for the exam, and we're covering the RMP outline. Okay? Before I round up, let me land by explaining what some organizations do to effectively manage their risk. So they come up with a risk register like this, but the important thing for them is understanding what they would call, what is my total risk exposure? So when they do probability rating times impact rating, they go a step further to do quantitative. So they do the quantitative risk analysis by multiplying the percent probability by the impact in euros, in yen, in dollars, in whatever currency they're using. Take a close look. They do that for all the risks. Let's say you got hundreds and hundreds of risks. But at the end, when you've multiplied probability in percent times impact in dollars, you're going to end up with an aggregate. You get what I'm saying? You're going to end up with an aggregate amount, and that aggregate amount is the EMV across the entire project. Those of you doing PMP, you know this, right? And that number right there at the bottom, that 89,150, in some firms, they say, well, that's our risk exposure. That's the amount we need to have in contingency. And while it is a very primitive method, it's better than nothing. So again, I am not criticizing any firm that does it. It's a primitive approach. And if it's working for you, like I said, it was working for one of my clients that's into building ships, They didn't even do qualitative. They didn't even do quantitative in dollars. They did quantitative using resource hours. It's working wonderfully for them. So I don't begrudge you, right? Just be innovative in how you apply it. Be mindful of it, and it's going to work wonders for you. All right. If you have any questions about risk management, it's always good to hear your questions. Okay, so drop your questions if you got any. But let's move on to our next journey in the world of AI powered risk management, navigating VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity with precision and clarity. So now I've given you the lay of the land of vanilla flavored 101 risk management. Let's dial it up just a little bit. Okay. And dialing up just a little bit is all about leveraging AI for risk management in real projects. The way to do this, if we're going to talk about every step in risk management, number one, when you are managing risks and you don't have experience to the degree that you need, maybe you got like a little experience, but you're now working on bigger projects, it would be prudent to engage with artificial intelligence to gain some extra ideas on how you can better do this. It doesn't hurt, and nobody needs to know. Because I know some of you, you're trying to act all cute. You don't want people to know you're using AI. There's no shame in that. There's no shame in using artificial intelligence. You don't have to put in your company data into GPT. In fact, PMI's tool, Infinity, I believe it's called. You don't have to put in data. You can just go straight in. And you can use it for insights if you haven't done so already. I'm curious, how many of you have used PMI's Infinity AI tool? It's like the chat GPT of PMI. Have you used it or not? So I think if you wanna work with Infinity, I think if you want your information to be stored, I think you need to at least have a membership. Well, at least have a registration. I believe it's a registration. So I am a member of the PMI. Okay. So I'm able to go into the tool and use it. But if you don't have Infinity, let me show you what Infinity looks like just so that we're on the same page. Because I know some of you are wondering, well, what does it look like? So I'll show you. PMI Infinity looks like this. It looks like a custom version of GPT. Now, PMI has a vast prompt library here for RTMs, daily stand ups, scope management. There are many topics, as you can see here. There's a topic, risk management. So, if I was a baby professional, I would definitely go. And even if you're an advanced professional, right? No harm. It says develop a risk register template that can be used to document and track risk throughout the project lifecycle. Click on that. Okay. So that's the prompt. You didn't even need to type the prompt in. PMI has that as a ready prompt. And there is your risk register, the beginnings of your risk register, right? That's not bad. But going beyond that, I personally have developed bespoke tools for my clients and myself that go beyond just having a GPT. They are a little bit more specific. So I'm going to give you an idea of how I leverage AI to generate similar data, but in less steps. So assuming I wanted to generate a risk register for a project, I would use a tool such as this. This is what I call the project risk generator tool. And this is peculiar to Praizion. But if you went into our tool and you typed in the project blurb, and the project blurb could be managing a $100 million project to build a new lab facility for a top Fortune 500 pharmaceutical out in Asia. Cost and schedule pretty fixed. 3,000 man project. I put in the information and I hit generate risk register. And that's all I need, but it's going to generate for me not just a vanilla flavored register, but it's going to generate for me a risk register which goes into possible risks on this project. And I could get even more specific with details that will help it generate the top risks for me. So if you're not using something like this and you are managing projects as a project manager, or you are a risk manager and you're not using AI to help you immediately generate some of this information, while you may feel prestige in doing it all alone, I don't think that's very wise. I think you could add more value to your company and your project by including artificial intelligence. You're not doing anything wrong. There's no wrongdoing. You don't have to feel guilty. So, whether you are generating a risk management plan, or whether it's a risk register, or whether you're doing a qualitative or quantitative risk analysis, you could use artificial intelligence. You could take your risk register, that risk register I just showed you, you could take it and you could feed it back into the tool and say, generate for me some ideas about X, Y, or Z, whatever the parameters are. Now, if I went back to what I just showed you, I could show you how to analyze using the power of artificial intelligence various parameters around volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, TECOP, and PESTLE, right? But let's hold off on TECOP, PESTLE, and VUCA for a while because I want to make sure I give you some more ideas before I show you any additional tools. So let's move on to some ideas for professionals to make it more pragmatic. How do you leverage AI for risk management in real projects? These are just some ideas, thinking out loud about things you could do. Okay. So, assuming you are on an IT software development project, you could use AI for early risk identification via project scope analysis. How do you do that? You got to feed the data in. Okay, now if the data is very specific to your firm and your firm does not have their own AI, it's sad. They should, especially if they're in the top tier of firms. But these days you could have your own AI behind your firewall. Maybe they should look into that. You could do code reviews, you could do chat GPT prompts or GPT prompts for dependency risks and historical failure patterns, AI driven velocity forecast, and a prompt could read what risk might arise with these APIs and architecture. You'd be amazed at what you get. Medical industry, similar to what I just showed you. How about literature mining for adverse event risk? You could take existing literature, feed it into the tool ethically, and get feedback. Regulatory intelligence, scanning FDA and EMA, portfolio risk analysis, and the prompt could be what regulatory risk for phase 2 trials in oncology exist? Construction projects, you could use AI for forecasting permit delays, weather risks, supply chain modeling, on site safety. You could do AI image analysis. These days, this exists, but of course, you have to spend money on it. But AI could survey a site and give intelligence as far as what are some of the risks that it sees. Schedule risks from commodity price volatility. You could just put that prompt in. Logistics projects, no difference. Supplier reliability, route optimization, depending on geopolitical conditions, weather risks. And you could use the AI. These days, it's real time. There's data sources for real time geopolitical monitoring for supply disruptions. And a sample prompt could be what delivery risks exist with this route and suppliers. When it comes to product development, you could use AI to identify compliance risks like FCC and CE risks, market readiness, and you could just ask, given this bill of materials, what sourcing or compliance risks may delay the launch? So the summary is general best practices, right? You could prompt with project charters, schedules, roadmaps, supplier lists. Nothing is too big for AI. You can give it tons of data and it will in a quick turnaround spit out ideas for you, as I'm going to show you with our VUCA, PESO, and TECOP tool. You could combine AI and predictive analytics and dashboards, but most importantly, don't forget your brilliance as a professional. As you use AI as a partner for your human experience, you just get further ahead. It's just a no brainer. So, the summary of all that I'm showing you is AI transforms risk management with early identification, very rich analysis, way beyond what I could do in Excel. I know a lot of you are Power BI fans, but Power BI plus AI will get you even further ahead. Adaptive responses, greater resilience, and just feed it good data. Don't feed it junk. Feed it good data. Don't be suspicious of AI. Look at it as a partner, right? Not a bandit. And just pilot AI on your next project. Some of you still shy of AI, like AI is taboo, like it's bad. It's not bad. It's nothing bad in using artificial intelligence. What is bad is using it and denying that you used it, or using it under the table when your firm has said, thou shalt not feed our information into AI. If you're doing it, please don't do that. Stop doing it. What I would advise is coming to some sort of agreement. Okay. Now I want to go back to PMI's tool. And the only reason I'm going back here, I'm not selling it. Okay. I'm not trying to sell you, oh, be a PMI member. No, I'm not selling you any of that stuff, even though there's huge advantages of being a PMI member if you are a PMI or PMI-RMP. But one of the advantages of using this is it is a familiar face. PMI is a reputable firm, right? So using this, in my mind, has less risk, right? Because this is PMI's AI tool. So in my mind, it has less risk, but still follow the same procedures you would if you were speaking to someone over the web. Be careful what you put in. Don't put in trade secrets, trade agreements, contracts and things of that nature, except it's behind your firewall and your firm says it's okay to do. Okay. Now, let me just give you a very quick example. So if I was going to be a PM on, let's say, a project type I'd never managed, I am about to manage a large scale AI transformation for my healthcare company. What should I be thinking about for a risk management plan? Guide me. Give me a template. Give me ideas. And it's going to think for a little bit, and then it's going to spit out some ideas for you. Managing a large scale AI transformation in healthcare setting involves careful planning. And honestly, what I like about this tool is it knows from PMI's pool that it's trained them on and the repository. It gives you a lot of context, more specific context, but it talks about plans and things you should review. It's always a great start. I have a lot of people who are very suspicious of AI. Well, maybe this will give you a little bit of comfort to know you're in a familiar territory. It's even giving you examples of how your register could be formatted, and it's giving you links for you to check out sources. Okay. Another tool that people kind of look like a gift horse in the mouth is Miro. Okay. Now, this is an example of how you could use Miro to amplify your ideas. So if you look here, it says, in a few words, describe the diagram you'd like to create. So I said, risk relationships for new pharma, new medication project for bespoke meds for cancer. And this is what it came up with. It came up with, as you can see here, this is a mind map. And it's letting me know these are the kind of risks I should be thinking about on a project like this. Under risk management, I've got financial, I've got legal, I've got operational risk, I've got clinical risks, I've got stakeholder engagement risk, post-market surveillance, and many other things, right? Research and development, regulatory, FDA, manufacturing, quality control. It just makes you amplified thinking with minimal effort. Minimal effort. And it's all clicking that magic button. Now, if I said, transform this into an engineering project for a 85-story structure in ME. I feed it, and all it needs is a few seconds to generate a mind map of potential risks, right? Cost overruns, under financial, legal risks, operational risks. I see a lot of people building very simple documents, and simple documents are good because they waste a lot of time. But beyond the simple documents, maybe using Miro to create a mind map is going to help amplify your team's thinking way beyond what they would have ever done. But you, as a human, you couldn't possibly come up with a mind map like this in 10 seconds, 20 seconds. But this tool, Miro, can. You see, and what I'm trying to show you is don't just look for AI for being a document. I call it the chipmunk people. The chipmunk people are just doing the templates. The chipmunk mnemonic. I saw six Cubans, or I saw six chipmunks quietly roasting coffee, reading poetry stories. The other mnemonic is I saw six Cubans quietly rolling cigars, really puffing smoke. But I call it the chipmunk mnemonic because it goes through all of the integration, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resources. And what a lot of PMs are doing, they're just doing the chipmunk stuff. They're just doing, oh, I got to create a project charter. But there's more than a project charter. Project charters are good. They're very important. I agree. But beyond the project charter, you need to start using AI. You need to use big boy, big girl AI to do more than just the chipmunk stuff. You got to use it to amplify thought. You got to use it to challenge thinking. You got to use it to analyze data. You got to use it to create things that are huge, hugely important. Okay. So it's not just about documents. Like when you go into PMI's tool, uh, don't just use it PMI Infinity. Don't just use it to create documents. Use it to amplify thinking. Okay. So let me give you another example. Let's say you're on a project. I just got word that the client has additional services to be bid on. How could we position our 50 years oil and gas and construction experience on this bid? Now it's very loose. It's very loose. But sometimes you got to keep things loose when you're putting them into AI for your privacy reasons. But if I put that as a prompt, it's giving me ideas that I may not have readily thought about. I'm not even creating a risk register. I'm just asking it for advice, you see. And then you got to go to the next level, and you got to say, based on whatever parameters, what you know, maybe what you know about me. So my AI tool of choice, it knows a lot about me. It knows so much that it actually reminds me about stuff I've forgotten. Now, I know that scares people, but it doesn't scare me because I ain't done anything bad. I ain't running from the law. Having trained the likes of the FBI, definitely ain't running from the law. So I have no problem with telling AI a thing or two about me. Okay. So based on what you know, coach me into this role. And for me, it knows everything. It knows my mentors. It knows John Maxwell is my leadership coach. It knows Roy is my agile coach. It knows Dr. Rick Brinkman is my communication consciousness coach, so on and so forth. So when I tell it stuff, it's coming at me with specific ideas. See? Specific ideas. I did this for Roy one day, my buddy Roy. I said, Roy, watch this. I asked my AI tool, do you know who Roy is? And immediately it told Roy his whole history. And he said, yeah, that's Phil, that's scary. But anyway, jokes apart, you got to begin using AI more than just a dumb terminal. It's more than just a paper pusher. You see how it's mentoring me. Understanding industry language, leverage your experience, things that you may not have really gotten. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know they are paying hundreds and thousands of dollars for coaching that is not even up to par. It's not even. I mean, you would be better off speaking to AI than speaking to some humans, right? Except they're very skilled like me. You see what I did there is a shameless plug. Well, go to pmanonymous.com if you're looking for coaching in anything I've told you today. PM Anonymous is where I coach, train, and mentor people. Now, AI can't replace me, but it can help me. It can help me, and it can help you. Okay. With that said, let's go back into one of the tools that I showed you earlier. I want to show you one last tool, being a risk nerd, a risk nut, because my buddy, the risk doctor, Dr. David Hilson, I'm going to show you this thing right here. Let's go to the Risk Doctor YouTube channel. I want you to subscribe. He didn't pay me to tell you this. But I want you to go to my buddy, the Risk Doctor channel, because I know that you're going to get so much value. You're going to get so much value out of this. All right, Prashanth, I see a question there. I'll definitely be taking that for you. So go to the Risk Doctor video channel. So speaking about your question, which is a brilliant question about how do you get PDUs? Well, one of the quickest ways is that's David. So to get PDUs, depending on what you're trying to get the PDUs for, number one, I want to recommend, if you are a risk nut, because there's not a lot of good risk, there's not a lot of good post PMP risk instruction. Even at the PMP level, a lot of the risk instruction is pretty basic. It doesn't take your thinking outside of the box. And that's why I would recommend riskresponder.com, which David Hilson and I put together, just 4.5 hours. And you just record that as your PDUs because you watch the videos. Make sure that when you are claiming these as PDUs, you got to let PMI know what you gained from it. My PDUs have been audited in the past. PMI challenged me. Well, what did you learn from that Six Sigma training? So you have to make sure you get all that you've learned and you document it, because anybody can be audited. But I would suggest the riskresponder.com. And beyond that, let me show you one more secret here. So if you're a member of the PMI, again, trust me, I am not selling you anything. I'm just letting you know, because I have my own views about having to pay continuously. I know some people hate having to pay continuously for membership, and I don't blame them. Everyone's different. But for me, I see my investment in myself as something I'm fortunate to do as a living human. So, having to pay PMI for membership is just part of my development, my personal development. So if you're looking to gain PDUs, this is what I would recommend. Let me show you right here. You need to go to projectmanagement.com as a member of the PMI. This is free. When you go to projectmanagement.com under webinars, you got live webinars, you've got on-demand webinars. Under on-demand webinars, if you log in as a PMI member, you'll be able to see how many PDUs you have left in your cycle. And then you can also search for fun topics. Like if I wanted something from risk, just type in risk, and it will come up with some ideas. When to trust AI and when to intervene, Mayday, decision making under duress. So those are some of the topics. But if I get specific and I say, all right, I want something for my PMI-RMP, then it gets more specific, you see. So I quite like what PMI has done. Under industry, if I wanted something from Aero, being someone who worked in Aero, I could click that. And then I have risk management basics. Now, some of these, you got to watch them because I don't mean watch them. I mean be careful because they're quite old. So this is 2011. So some of the information there might have changed relative to PMI's current standards. But there you have it. And if you try to go into the video, it says premium content. So you have to be a member. Okay. But I think this is a very good feature PMI introduced for members. And then you have other things that you can look at. But really, for the PDUs, as you asked, Prashanth, let's put your question out there so people know what your question was. Um, not PDUs. Oh, I see. 30 contact hours. I see. So you're not asking about PDUs to maintain your RMP. Well, the best thing I would recommend is ask your company to invite your buddy Phil. If your company has enough people that want to get certified, I'll be happy to do that to, train, coach, mentor them. But at the moment, I do not have a full blown 30-hour risk management course. I know there are other alternatives, but I would not recommend any except me. Because I truly believe what Dr. David Hilson and I have developed is good. It's 4.5 hours, but if you invited me to your firm, that could be easily blown out into the right amount of hours of 30. As you can see, I've been speaking here casually, and we haven't even gone into, the silos of planning, identifying. The sad thing is there are not a whole lot of RMPs in the world, so it doesn't justify me spending so much time in training 30 hours of risk to just one or two people. I need a class of individuals to make him worth my while. So for anyone listening, if they've got, people who want to go down this path, or maybe you as an individual, go to pmanonymous.com, check out what I have there. If your firm is willing to sponsor you, I can mentor you one on one. I can teach you one on one for your RMP exam. I would love to do that, but the conditions have to be right. Um, to give a shout out to a really good book. Let's see, is that book in my library still? So there's a book that was written long ago, and honestly, risk has changed a little bit. But I want to give a shout out to Rita Mulcahy, rest her soul, because she came up with a very good risk management book. And that risk management book was in my library as I prepared for the RMP exam. And she had some very good questions. I don't know if that's still in my library, but it was a pretty significant book on risk. It's a very, very good book. But unfortunately, PMI have changed the game. Not only do you have project risk, you have portfolio risk, you have program risk, and you also have agile oriented thinking for risk. So that book may not be encompassing, but it's definitely a very good book to liberate your thinking by the late Rita Mulcahy. Okay, so with that said, thank you, Prashanth. I appreciate it. Awesome, awesome. If there are any other questions, please let me know. I'm trying to look for questions in the chat. And that was your initial question. Thank you very much. I'm also looking on Instagram. I see a few of our friends, Anosh, Deccan, Akilumadi, Talisha, Aman, and Sahu. Thank you for coming through there, and all of you who may have come through on LinkedIn or other platforms. We're just about closing the AI portion before I go into the RMP portion. So let me go into one more topic here. Let's go into the concept of VUCA, TECOP, the regular suspects. I'm going to show you a tool that will kind of liberate your thinking a little bit. And let me share my screen. So over the past number of minutes, we've been kind of thinking out of the box about risk, how to view risk in this age. When I get done with this next thing, we'll go into this thing right here, the RMP outline. So this is another diagnostic tool. So in the very beginning, I showed you the project risk register generator from Praizion, and we put in a blurb. So a project to manage uh, 85-story structure, build and use uh, a boot contract arrangement upon completion for 10 years, uh, 300 million budget in Abu Dhabi, and generate the risk register. I should take that first. And then we're going to generate the risk register. Like I said, in the world of risk, you want to do things smart. So here we go. We got various risks: soil instability and ground conditions, accidents or incidents, disputes. So this is the beginning. We can go nuclear, can go crazier in this thing. But this is one tool that helps you immediately generate a risk register, spits everything out in the blink of an eye. The second tool that I would use for this, I would get that same description and put it in here. And if I wanted to get a pestle analysis um, as far as what this project could present, all I'm going to do is click Get Pestle Insights. And when we talk about pestle, we're thinking about political, economic, social, technological risks, legal risks, and environmental. So here it breaks down based on what I put in. Here's the political risks. Abu Dhabi's political environment is generally stable, but changes in regulations related to construction, real estate, or foreign investment could impact the project. So it's giving you ideas. I'm not saying this is an all-inclusive list of pestle insights, but it's a very good beginning. And I'm telling you, when you get intelligent people in the room, this it just gives them wings. It's not Red Bull. It's a good pestle analysis that gives your team wings. But pestle is just one way, is one way of thinking. And you can see the very detailed report it's given me. We could probably talk about this and get insights, cover our bases. Everything from labor laws, intellectual property, building codes. It's helping you in the blink of an eye. You get what I'm saying? Now, going over to volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, we can also get those insights. So I'm clicking on the VUCA button, and the AI tool, based on how it's been trained and what it knows, it's going to give me volatility insights. Rapid and unpredictable changes in the external environment are likely. Key areas of concern, and it gives you details. I won't go into all the details, right? But that's a VUCA look. And for those of you that haven't read the PMI's PMBOK Guide 6th edition, it has these three frameworks for risk prompts. So PESTLE, VUCA, and TECOP are three ways you can get further insights. Let's click on the TECOP insights. And here at the bottom, if you scroll down, you see AI is doing its thing, and it's giving you the TECOP: technical, environmental, commercial, operational, and political risks. This is in the blink of an eye. So for those of you project managers that are not using artificial intelligence like this, I want to encourage you to do so. Right? And if your IT department is available to build things for you, why won't it? Why isn't your IT team building stuff for your PMO? If you need someone to consult with your IT team and PMO, this guy will help you. Okay? And honestly, it's not so much a shameless plug, even though it is, but it's really a lifeline, because I know many firms want to go to the extra mile and they don't know how. They don't know who's consulting in, this AI driven project management, risk management insights. This is your guy if you're looking to do that. If you don't have the good ideas already and You want someone who's consulted and can give your IT team ideas of what to build, bespoke tools to help you. Hit me up. I'd love to help because I want you to go beyond the chipmunk level. Too many PMs at the chipmunk level. You got to go beyond chipmunk. You got to go to higher level while the tools and the minor tools, I'll call them, or the templates are important. You got to free yourself from just thinking, oh, project charter, AI developer project charter. Ooh, I got a project charter. Yeah, I know. I was at that stage in the beginning, but I had to transcend the template, chipmunk template stage. All right. Well, that's pretty much some insights into tools. I've shown you how to leverage Miro. I've shown you how to leverage bespoke tools such as our risk diagnostic tool. And now it's time for us to go into the RMP exam, the PMI RMP. So this is the PMI RMP content outline. I shared this with you at the very beginning. I'm going to put this in the chat again just so that you've got it. Let's put it in the chat. Is there anyone here thinking of taking the PMI RMP exam? So Prashant had a question. Which book is that? Now, I want to say that book. I want to say I don't want to promise. Let me have a look. I don't want to promise and then fail. Let's see. Oh dear. Yeah. Hold on a second. Do I have the book? Hmm. I'm so sorry. I'm not able to find the book. Not able to. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I think I found it. Yeah, I found it. Okay. It's always worth a try, isn't it? It's worth a try. This is the book that I read as I got ready for my RMP exam many, many years ago. Many, many years ago, by the late, great Rita Mulcahy. I don't know if you'll find this book on Amazon, but what I like about the book, there are very few people in the world of project management that I would recommend to anyone. But I recommend anything I know she did because a lot of the stuff that's coming out now, she's not with us anymore. So she's not like all over that, even though it may contain her insights. But this one, I know that she wrote this one shortly before she left this planet. And it's a really good book. It's very well written. And I mean, it's very impressive. She was definitely one of the great minds of our time. So, I know a lot of people, when they look at the book for PMP, they don't like her writing style. I don't mind her writing style. Maybe because I'm a little bit like that. I'm so over the top in project management that I can understand why someone would write the book as she does. But it keeps you on your feet, keeps you on your toes. The book has a lot of nice little templates, has some templates. Um, if I go to the back of the book, I think it's marked up because I really actively use this book. The way I use this book, I didn't really study a whole lot for my RMP. And I think it was a few days to my exam. I ended up getting the book. So just sat down with the book and devoured the book. And then I ended up taking the exam. So the book, it's called Rita Mulcahy's Risk Management Tricks of the Trade for Project Managers, second edition. Okay. So if you want to check out that book, go to Amazon. The book is there. Okay. All right. So there you have it. Yes, indeed. Yeah, she's really good. A lot of the last generation PMPs, yeah, they used, yeah. Her writing style is very alert, very, very present, and just one of the great minds of our industry for sure. All right. So even though, the funny thing about people's perspective is it just amuses me. Someone left a comment on Amazon and said, well, Rita wasn't even an RMP. How can she write a book about risk management exam? I'm like, wow, well, that's ignorant. That's ignorant. You don't have to be an RMP to, my buddy, Dr. David Hilson, is not an RMP, but he's one of the greatest minds, if not the greatest mind that I've encountered in the world of risk. He's like the risk OG. You know, you want to know a thing or two about risk? That's him. That's why we call him the risk doctor. Okay, let's go back to where we were. So we're talking about the risk management professional exam. Today is risk day in my celebrations of being an RMP 15 years, a PMP 20 years. So this exam is not as it's not as simple as it looks. Because when you look at the PMP, you got like many tasks. And if you look at this on the surface, it looks like, okay, just five things. No, each one of these has hundreds of other things. You see, hundreds of other things. Um, just to clarify the question that we got from Prashant, because I know some of you must have been wondering, what does he mean by PDUs? So it's not really PDUs, Prashant. It's really more like contact hours. So you're really asking, how do you get the contact hours? That's really what it is for the PMP, or the RMP, I beg your pardon. Because PDUs is, I'm certified, I need professional development units to maintain. Contact hours is, I want to take an exam. How do I qualify for that? So let's see what PMI has here. So these are the requirements. So let's expand this because there's a lot to go into. If you have a high school diploma and you don't have a degree, you need to have 36 months spent in the specialized area of risk management within the last 5 years. And on top of that, you need to have 40 contact hours of formal education. Okay? You need to have 40 hours in the area of risk management training. If you do have a 4-year degree, okay, or a bachelor's, then you should have spent 24 months in the specialized area of risk management within the last 5 years. And we're talking about 5 consecutive years. We're not saying, well, I did some risk management in the 90s for a year. That's not going to qualify. It has to be within the past 5 years. You also need 30 contact hours of formal education in risk. And that is what our friend Prashant was asking about, this stuff right here. And it's hard to come by good and great risk management training because a lot of times people just do it because you're trying to make a buck. But someone like the risk doctor and I, when we get into it, we get into it because we love it. We get into it because we have a passion. So it's been 8 years since we did that program on riskresponder.com. But we're very passionate about what we talk about in those videos. If you're thinking about taking the risk management professional exam, I would recommend using the riskresponder.com videos as part of your prep so that you are elevating your understanding of risk to a master level as opposed to it just being, well, I'm a project manager managing risk. There's a difference between you being a specialist. So this exam is for people who are risk specialists. In other words, you really went into the belly of the beast of risk management during those 5 years that you're referring to. Okay, and then we also have those who went to a GAC accredited college. You need 12 months in the specialized area of risk management. You need 30 hours of formal education. Okay. Now, the rest of this outline in typical PMI style is going into the exam details. So you have 100 questions that are scored, 15 questions that are pre-test questions, and a total of 115. The exam, the allocated exam time is 2.5 hours. Um, for those who don't pass, it's three strikes and you're out. So you can take it three times. If you don't pass it on third try, that person has to do it again after waiting a year. Okay. But with that said, let's cover each of these areas: risk strategy and planning, risk identification, risk analysis, and risk response, and then monitoring and controlling. Okay. Okay. So, in usual PMI style, you have domains, tasks, and enablers. And this is how it's broken down in the outline. But the outline is a little bit boring to look at. I'll just be straight up honest. So I'm going to use my slides. Okay. Let's use some slides. Let's put a little bit of color on the screen. That's the artsy side of me kicking in. I don't want to just look at black and white sheets of paper. Even though that is important, definitely read it for yourself. Okay. All right. I'm not sure if I was very polite to introduce myself, but that's me after speaking to you for about an hour. How about an introduction? So I got certified in '05, but after I got certified, I realized that I needed to get certified in other areas that I had specialized in. Schedule management is probably going to be sometime later this week or early next week. And then today is risk day because I get wildly excited about risk. And after I got certified, I've been instrumental in helping a lot of companies and agencies, as you see on the screen. So my PMI-RMP certification came after my PMP. Going into domain one, risk strategy and planning, what exactly is this about? Well, think about it. If you're strategizing and planning, you got to have some benchmarks and lessons learned, right? That needs to be step one. You don't just go into, well, I guess we're just going to plan from nothing. No, don't do that. Use a low hanging fruit. You got to assign responsibility for preliminary analysis to someone. Usually could be a risk manager, it could be a project manager. You establish relevant risk process documents. Okay. Now, as you approach the RMP exam, I want you to understand, in the words of my buddy, the risk doctor, he often says RMP is PMP plus, which means this is not for PMP level. This is PMP plus a higher level because you're thinking more strategically. So this is strategic think as well. Task two is you got to assess the project environment for threats and opportunities. Let's zoom in here real quick. You got to determine the needed approaches. Sometimes it could be agile. And you know, the way we manage risk in the world of agile is totally different. Could be similar to a waterfall, right? Or it could be hybrid. You got to analyze the environment at a high level, understand the PESTLE, political, economic, social, technological, legal, and so on. Evaluate the organizational and cultural risk appetite. Some organizations have a very poor risk appetite, very, very poor. And what I mean by that is they have a very low tolerance and appetite for risk. They are not going to bound after the opportunity because they're scared. Oh dear. And some organizations are the opposite. They're like lions. They go after every opportunity that makes sense. They take big risks, but they're calculated. So you got to know the environment you're in. You got to analyze the PM, the project management information system and data, conduct stakeholder analysis, all this good stuff. I wish I had more time to cover the details, but I don't. So I'm going to have to be quicker. Number three, confirm risk thresholds based on risk appetite. So you got to understand, in every organization, there are thresholds for risk. In one of the firms I was at, our threshold for SPI and CPI was like a 0.95. If it goes beyond that, there's problems. And other firms, they make their risk thresholds known. So if you identifying risks and you're scoring risks, there could be thresholds, right? After which that risk has to be avoided. Things such as that. Task four, establish a strategy. You got to determine how you're going to go about doing things with tools and templates and metrics. Task five, you got to have a risk management plan. This is the bread and butter of the risk manager. Why wouldn't you have one? Newsflash, a lot of PMs don't have a risk management plan. They don't. And they're managing millions of dollars of project. Even hundreds of thousands is bad enough. Even tens of thousands, my friends. So in this one, in the RMP outline, you are supposed to have a risk management plan. You look at the RACI and the RAMs, you define the roles, you compile all that good information, you have an RBS, a risk breakdown structure, which could exist from the past, and you're going to define communication and prioritization criteria. You're going to establish stakeholder empowerment and education strategies, and you're going to be intentional about it. And then plan and lead. That word lead is laden with a lot of insights because you're going to influence. Leadership is influence. So you're going to influence risk management activities with stakeholders. You're going to collaborate with them at every level. You're going to leverage stakeholder analysis. You're going to manage risk attitudes. So the risk attitude of an individual is how they see the risk. Risk attitudes are diverse in organizations. Some people have a very negative attitude towards risk, and some have a very positive attitude towards risk. And I'm talking about it's a negative risk, but there's a massive opportunity behind it. Some stakeholders are running away all the time from risk. And then you got to understand that and build that in. This is not about your attitude, it's about theirs. So you got to build all that in, and you got to lead stakeholders with that mindedness. Some stakeholders are very scared, very afraid, but it's up to you to lead them, right? Lead them to discovery, right? Beyond their biases. Because as you go through risk management, you know biases creep in and that influences our risk attitudes. So where you see biases, you gotta be able to ask the right questions for people to be free of themselves and their biases. Domain number two, risk identification. One of my favorites. For risk identification, I like having risk meetings where we identify risks together. We use rapid means of identifying risks like Ishikawa's, or we use mind maps, or we use affinity diagrams. Another way you could do this a little bit more laboriously is by having interviews, interviewing subject matter experts, but ultimately you're going to analyze the results and you're going to come out with not only the risk, but the cause and the effect. You're going to examine assumption and constraint analyses. You leverage assumption and constraint analyses. You categorize them, and then you look for those associated risks. And my favorite, cascading risks. Risks leading from one risk to another. It's that way of thinking that you need to be aware of for this exam. Document risk triggers. Risk triggers are warning signs that a risk is about to occur or has occurred. You document thresholds and you develop your risk register. Cause, risk, effect. I call it the CRE model. Don't go anywhere without your CRE. If you're a risk expert or you're looked at as the risk guru in the firm and you're not focusing on these three upfront, these three, cause, risk, effect, you're doing it wrong, my friend. If you're just looking at the single risk without being aware of causes and effects, without being aware of the possibility of cascading risks, you're not doing it right, my friend. So these are some of the things PMI is trying to sensitize us to in the outline. Documenting risk triggers and thresholds based on context and environment, developing the risk register, and ultimately analyzing the risk, going into domain three. In risk analysis, we talk about a qualitative risk analysis. I've shown you this, so I'm not going to waste time on it. But when you do a qualitative risk analysis, as I said in the very beginning, you got to think about all the dimensions, not only cost. A lot of times when you ask people about risk, they're just thinking about cost. And that's the wrong way to do it. It should be schedule, it should be budget, it should be resources. And if you wanted to convert those into some sort of monetary insight, do it, but do it intentionally. And then you got to prioritize risks. You got to perform some sort of ordinal classification. And then you get into the forbidden zone of quantitative, the one that people are, oh, I don't want to do it. I'm scared of numbers, Phil. Or maybe your management. Maybe your management is one of those managements. You show them big numbers and they lash out at you. Well, I understand why you don't do quantitative then. But for this exam, you got to know it. You got to understand your expected monetary value. You got to understand how that's put together. It's the aggregate effect. It's everything. So it's the aggregate effect of risks on the project. You got to understand decision trees. I actually have a video somewhere on YouTube showing you how to do decision tree analysis because it used to be big on the PMP exam. Maybe not anymore, but just the mindedness of seeing probability branches, right, for your potential line of action or potential projects, it could be very helpful in the real world. So if you haven't watched that video, just search Praizion decision tree analysis. It should probably come up with that video. All right, moving on. Identifying threats and opportunities. So you want to do, like I said, an Ishikawa, you want to do SWOT analysis, do an impact analysis, do all this great stuff, but empower stakeholders to independently identify risk. One of the things that we used to talk about back in the day was doing an anonymous survey of the experts. So if you do an anonymous survey of the experts, there's not going to be a whole lot of influencing you because of what I said or influencing me because of what you said. So it makes sense for you as much as possible to try to gather this not only in a workshop, but also leading up to the workshop. Just get some independent thoughts. Okay. And that takes us to domain for risk responses. As a professional, you want to be aware of the options I showed you. You got the A team, avoid, transfer, escalate, accept, mitigate. You've got the easy, enhance, accept, share, exploit, and escalate. I showed it to you in a different order, but you got those. I don't know if you were here when I showed that, and I think I got rid of it, unfortunately, but I'll just remind you really quick. You got to think about A team for the negative risks, and you got to think about easy for the positive risks. And trust me when I tell you, this stuff is so alive and well on the exam. You actually can't escape it, right? You're going to come across this in planning risk responses. So the summary of steps 1 to 7 is you got to understand when to use an avoid versus a mitigate versus an escalate. Task 2 here is implement risk responses. And this is where you are now doing what you said you were going to do. You're executing, you're collecting feedback, you're evaluating, and you're improvising actions as needed. And we call those workarounds. Domain 5, this is monitor and close risks. Don't be alarmed. Those of you PMPs or PMP students, Phil, I didn't know that was a process. It's monitor risk, but in the outline, it's called monitor and close risk because you got to close risks out of your risk register. So task 1, as you're doing your monitoring, is you're reconciling performance and data reports. You're monitoring overall project risk exposure. Task 2, you're monitoring the pesky little residual risks and secondary risks. So the residual risk is a risk that remains as a result of you taking action. It helped, but there's a little bit left, or maybe there's a lot left. A secondary risk is a risk that emerges as a result of your risk actions. So you are mopping the floor, right? And there's a risk of someone falling. And you say, well, to take care of the risk of someone falling, let's put a sign that says wet floor. And then you put in a wet floor sign, you've now created a secondary risk of someone falling over, and that's how risk is in general. You could take action, but you've opened a wormhole of something worse. Not in every situation, but in some. So you got to be aware of those. Task 3, provide information to update relevant project documents. Aggregate, summarize risk data, update the risk information, the register, the lessons learned, the risk report, and push out those updates. Monitor project risk levels. It's something you should always be doing. You should always be thinking about all manner of risk: people risks, equipment risks, compliance risks, technological risks, commercial risks. Basically, think TECOP, VUCA, and PESO all day long. And when you're done, my friends, remember that before your exam, you got to have some questions like this. This is an easy one, by the way. During a hybrid project, the team identifies a risk that a key component may not meet quality standards, potentially delaying delivery. The team proposes to work with an experienced external consultant to ensure the quality standards are met. Which risk response strategy is being applied? And you know what everyone chooses for this? Everyone chooses the wrong answer. Because the answer is not A. This is not transfer. When you really boil it down, what are you doing? You are trying to ensure that the quality standards are met, but it's not a given. It's not a given. So the answer to this would not be transfer, as many inexperienced RMP students would choose. It's actually mitigate, because you're bringing in an external consultant to reduce the likelihood or the impact of the risk. So it wouldn't be transfer. Okay, bringing in someone doesn't necessarily mean, oh, it's transfer. Let's do a couple more. This one. A project's budget includes funds specifically allocated for unforeseen risks. Midway through the project, a critical risk materializes, requiring the use of these funds. Which concept is being utilized? Okay, now I expect those who are PMP students in the making, I expect you to get this. This is relatively straightforward. So you would know that contingencies are for known risks. For unforeseen risks, the answer would be B. So management reserves. And these are more like definitional questions. All right, let's ask one from a different world. Finally, during a sprint planning meeting, the team identifies a risk that a new tool may not integrate well with the existing system. The team decides to proceed, but agrees to revisit the risk at the next sprint review. What strategy has been applied? You can hit the pause button if you need a challenge and you want to find out, can I really rationalize this? So, my friends, the best answer for this one, it's not mitigate. It's not mitigate. The best answer is accept. But why is it accept? Well, accepting the risk means acknowledging it but taking no immediate action. Saying, all right, let's go ahead. We'll take a look at it next time. You've done nothing. You've done zero, which is why the answer is accept. All right, my awesome professionals. Thank you for those of you who came through and asked the questions. It was lovely to see some familiar faces. Some of you haven't seen in a very long time, but thank you very much. This is, again, celebrating 20 years as a PMP, 15 years as an RMP. It's been a long time. So this is my way of stirring up the urgency to be aware of project management and risk management, the RMP exam, and all the other topics I've covered today. All right, things are going to about 2 hours, and I owed it to you folks to do this because I haven't really gone in on risk the way we did today. Not to mention AI powered risk management. So, do you have any final questions? I know it's very late on the East Coast. Some of you already like, you gone. I don't blame you. It's quite late on the East Coast. It's already 11 p.m. But thank you very much for coming through. I appreciate you watching. Smash that like button if you haven't already, and share this with your colleagues, with other RMPs. Show them, hey, you ever watched anything about AI risk management? It might interest them. And just remember, even though I'm not awarding PDUs saying, well, I got a certificate, I don't, but you can claim this. You know, you can claim this as part of your PDUs. Document what you watched, how long you watched it for, what you learned, and this could be part of your PDUs. Why wouldn't you claim it? All right, it's self directed learning, and you've learned a lot about risk today. All right, thank you very much. I wish you all the very best and appreciate you joining. You take care, and I wish you success.